Frank Miller stood at the large window on the observation deck of the U.S. Watchman. The stars stretched out before him, countless points of light against the black canvas of space. He had been standing there for nearly an hour, thinking about the mission ahead. The U.S. Watchman was not built for fighting. It was a stealth ship, designed to watch and learn without being seen. Its hull was covered with special materials that absorbed radar and light. Its engines were quiet, giving off almost no heat that other ships could detect. It was, as Captain Olivia Thompson often said, a shadow among shadows. Frank was the main tactical observer on the ship. Before joining the Watchman, he had studied battle tactics for 15 years. He could look at how ships were positioned and know what they planned to do next. Admiral William Blake had personally chosen Frank for this mission. "Your orders are simple," the Admiral had told him 3 days ago. "Watch the military exercise. Record everything. Do not interfere. No matter what happens." Frank had nodded, but now he wondered if it would be that simple. The joint exercises between Earth forces and the Centauri were rare. After years of Cold War and small fights along the border, the two powers had finally agreed to work together. This exercise was meant to build trust. The door to the observation deck slid open. Captain Thompson walked in, her boots making soft sounds on the metal floor. "Can't sleep, Miller?" she asked. "Just thinking about the mission, Captain," Frank said. "Something doesn't feel right." Captain Thompson stood beside him at the window. She was shorter than Frank, but carried herself with quiet confidence. Her short gray hair framed a face marked by years of difficult decisions. "The Centauri asked for these exercises," she said. "They suggested the location. They've been open about their ship positions and weapon systems." Frank nodded. "I know. That's what bothers me. They've never been this open before." The captain sighed. "We all have our orders, Lieutenant Commander. The Watchman stays hidden. We observe. We record. Nothing more." "And if something goes wrong?" Frank asked. "Then we will deal with it," she said firmly. "But let's not borrow trouble." A soft beep came from her wrist device. She tapped it once. "Captain, we're approaching the exercise zone," said a voice. It belonged to Lisa Rodriguez, their communications officer. "The Terran fleet has just dropped out of faster-than-light travel. The Centauri ships are moving into position." "On my way," Captain Thompson replied. She looked at Frank. "Ready to do your job, observer." Frank nodded and followed her to the bridge. The bridge of the U.S. Watchman was smaller than those of combat ships. 12 stations formed a circle around a central holographic display. Each station was filled by a specialist, the best in their fields. Lisa Rodriguez sat at communications, her fingers moving quickly over her screen as she intercepted and sorted signals from both fleets. Beside her, Science Officer Elizabeth Park analyzed the data coming in from the Watchman's sensitive equipment. Chief Engineer Alan Parker monitored the ship's stealth systems. Even standing on the bridge, Frank could barely hear the engines. That's how quiet they were. At the helm sat Samantha Hill, perhaps the best pilot in the fleet. She had guided the Watchman through enemy territory 6 times without being detected once. Security Officer Daniel Wood stood near the captain's chair, always alert. His job was to protect the ship if they were ever discovered. "Report," Captain Thompson said as she took her seat. 3 fleet groups in position," Lisa said. "The Terran Defense Force under Commander Susan Grant on the U.S. Dauntless, the Centauri Battle Group led by Rear Admiral Peter Lawson, and the drone ships programmed to act as the enemy." On the holographic display, Frank could see the positions of all ships. The Terran vessels were arranged in standard formation, a pattern used for centuries, updated for space combat. The Centauri ships formed elegant curved lines, their design so different from the blocky human vessels. "Begin recording all tactical data," Frank said to his team. "I want every move, every power reading, every communication." As the simulated battle was about to begin, Frank couldn't shake the feeling that they were watching something more dangerous than a simple exercise. The simulated battle began slowly. The Terran ships under Commander Susan Grant moved in perfect formation. The Centauri vessels, with their curved hulls that looked like half-moons, moved just as carefully. Between them, the drone ships began to move in random patterns, acting as the enemy that both sides would fight against. From the hidden safety of the U.S. Watchman, Frank Miller watched it all. His eyes moved between the large holographic display and the smaller screen at his station. He made notes about every move, every change in position. "The Dauntless is leading with a standard Terran approach," Frank said to Captain Thompson. "They're forming a shield wall with their destroyers to protect the main battleships." Captain Thompson nodded. "And the Centauri?" Frank frowned. "That's what's strange. They're using textbook formations. Page 47 of the Basic Space Combat Manual, to be exact." "Why is that strange?" asked Daniel Woods from his security station. "Because the Centauri never fight like this," Frank explained. "They prefer fluid, changing patterns. They adapt quickly. But today, they're being too perfect, too predictable." On the display, the Centauri ships had formed 3 perfect lines. The front line was made up of small, fast attack ships. The middle had medium cruisers. The back held their large battleships. It was exactly how the manual said a fleet should be arranged. "Maybe they're just following the exercise plans," Lisa Rodriguez suggested from her communication station. Frank shook his head. "No. In the 15 years I've watched Centauri fleet movements, I've never seen them use a formation like this. Not once." The battle simulation continued. The drone ships, glowing red on the display, moved toward both fleets. The Terran and Centauri vessels fired simulated weapons. No real destruction, just computer signals that counted hits and calculated damage. "The Terran fleet is performing well," Frank noted. "Commander Grant is focusing fire on the largest drone ships first." Captain Thompson leaned forward in her chair. "And the Centauri?" Frank studied their movements. "They're holding back. Their front line is engaging the drones, but their middle and back lines are barely firing." Lisa suddenly touched her ear device. "Captain, I'm picking up strange communications from the Centauri flagship." "Strange how?" Captain Thompson asked. "It's on a frequency they didn't list in the exercise plans," Lisa explained. "And it's encrypted. Very heavily encrypted." Captain Thompson frowned. "Can you break it?" Lisa shook her head. "Not quickly. This is military-grade encryption. The kind used in real combat, not practice exercises." At that moment, Alan Parker spoke up from the engineering station. "Captain, I'm detecting power surges from the Centauri vessels." "Explain," ordered the captain. "Their shield harmonics are operating at full combat levels," Alan said, his voice growing concerned. "In a simulation, shields are normally set to 20% power. Theirs are at 100%. Frank felt a chill run down his spine. He looked more closely at the Centauri movements. Now he could see it. The perfect formation was slowly changing. The Centauri were subtly moving their ships into new positions. "They're setting up a trap," Frank said suddenly. "Look at how they're positioning themselves. They're slowly surrounding the Terran fleet." On the display, the pattern became clear. While appearing to engage the drone ships, the Centauri vessels were actually moving to encircle the U.S. Dauntless and its escort ships. "Why would they do that in a practice exercise?" Samantha Hill asked from the helm. "They wouldn't," Frank said grimly, "unless this isn't just practice." Captain Thompson stood up. "Lieutenant Commander Miller, are you suggesting the Centauri are planning a real attack under the cover of these exercises?" Frank nodded slowly. "I can't prove it yet, Captain. But everything I'm seeing suggests they're preparing for something much more serious than a simulation." Elizabeth Park looked up from her science station. "If that's true, the Terran fleet is sailing right into danger. And they have no idea it's coming." The bridge of the U.S. Watchman fell silent as they all stared at the holographic display. The blue dots of the Terran ships continued their planned movements, completely unaware that the green dots of the Centauri fleet were slowly closing in around them. Captain Thompson called an emergency meeting in the small conference room next to the bridge. The holographic display was moved there, showing the ongoing battle simulation. Frank Miller stood near it, pointing to the Centauri ships that were still moving in their suspicious pattern. "Let me be clear," Captain Thompson said. "You're suggesting that the Centauri are planning a real attack during what is supposed to be a friendly exercise?" Frank nodded. "I believe so, Captain. But without hard proof, it's still just a theory." Lisa Rodriguez joined them, holding her datapad. "I've been working on those encrypted transmissions," she said. "I can't break the code completely, but I've managed to catch some words. Strike, primary targets, and shield frequencies were mentioned several times." Alan Parker added, "And I've confirmed that all Centauri vessels are running their weapons at full power, not simulation levels. Their ships are ready for real combat." Captain Thompson walked slowly around the table. Everyone could see the weight of this decision on her shoulders. "If we're wrong, and we break our cover, we compromise years of intelligence work," she said. "The Watchman program could be shut down. And if we're right and do nothing?" Frank asked quietly. Elizabeth Park, who had been analyzing the data from the science station, looked up. "If they're planning a real attack, the Terran fleet could lose hundreds of lives. The Dauntless alone has a crew of over 200. Daniel Woods, always the security officer, thought about the bigger picture. This could restart the war, after all the progress we've made toward peace." "I need evidence," Captain Thompson said firmly. "Not just unusual behavior, something concrete that proves their intentions." Frank turned back to the holographic display. "Let me show you something," he said. He used his hands to zoom in on the movement of the Centauri ships. "Watch this pattern. See how they're positioning their cruisers here and their destroyers here." The others gathered around, watching as Frank traced the lines of movement. "This is a formation I've only seen once before," Frank continued. 5 years ago, at the Battle of Proxima, the Centauri used it to surround and destroy 3 Terran vessels in less than 2 minutes. They call it the Thracian maneuver. Samantha Hill, who had joined them from the helm, looked closely at the display. "You're right. They're creating a pocket. The Terran ships will be trapped inside, surrounded on 3 sides." "And the drone ships?" Captain Thompson asked. Frank pointed to the red dots on the display. "Look at their movement. They're not attacking randomly like they should be. They're actually herding the Terran ships toward that pocket." Lisa checked her readings. "Captain, I'm detecting power signatures from those drone ships that don't match their registered profiles. They're giving off more energy than they should be." "They're not drones at all," Frank said, the realization hitting him. "They're disguised Centauri vessels, smaller ships with special equipment to make them look like drones on sensors." Captain Thompson's face grew grave. "If you're right, the Terran fleet is being pushed into an ambush. Commander Grant has no idea." Just then, an alert sounded from the bridge. Elizabeth Park checked her datapad. "Captain, the Centauri cruisers are charging their main weapons. Energy levels are rising rapidly." "That's not part of the simulation," Alan said. "Those are real weapon preparations." Captain Thompson looked at each of her crew members, then back to the display where the U.S. Dauntless was slowly moving toward the trap. "We need to be absolutely certain before we act. Our orders are clear. Observe only." Frank pointed to another reading. "Captain, the Centauri flagship just transmitted a coded burst to all their vessels. It's a countdown." Suddenly, the holographic display flashed as one of the Centauri destroyers fired a real plasma torpedo. It streaked across space and struck one of the smaller Terran escort ships. The explosion was real, not simulated. "They've started," Frank said grimly. "This is no longer a drill." Captain Thompson's face hardened. "Red alert. All hands to battle stations." She turned to face her crew. "It seems our mission parameters have just changed." The U.S. Watchman's bridge was tense. Red emergency lights flashed as the crew rushed to their stations. On the main display, They could see the damaged Terran escort ship drifting, its side torn open by the Centauri torpedo. "The Terran fleet is responding," Lisa reported. "They think it was an accident. Commander Grant is asking the Centauri what happened." "And the Centauri response?" Captain Thompson asked. "They're apologizing," Lisa said, her voice tight, claiming a weapons malfunction. "But Captain, they're still charging weapons on all ships." Frank Miller studied the tactical display. The Centauri trap was almost complete. 3 more minutes and the Terran fleet would be fully surrounded. "We need to warn them," Frank said. "If we break stealth, we reveal ourselves to everyone," Daniel Woods reminded them. "Not just the Terrans, but the Centauri too." Captain Thompson faced a terrible choice. Their orders were clear: observe only, never interfere. Breaking those orders could mean court-martial, but staying hidden meant watching hundreds of Terran crew members die. "Captain," Frank said urgently, "the Centauri are targeting the Dauntless's engines. If they disable it first, the smaller ships will be picked off one by one." Elizabeth Park looked up from her science station. "We still don't have absolute proof this is a planned attack. It could be a group of rogue commanders. The Centauri government might not know." "Does that matter right now?" Alan Parker asked. "People are going to die if we don't do something." Another Centauri ship fired, hitting a second Terran vessel. This time, there was no mistaking it for an accident. The Terran ships began to raise their shields, but they were not prepared for a real battle. "The Terran fleet is scrambling," Frank reported, "but they're in disarray. They were not ready for this." Captain Thompson took a deep breath. "Mr. Miller, if you were commanding the Terran fleet right now, what would you need to know to survive this attack?" Frank thought quickly. "The Centauri trap formation has a weakness. If the Terrans break toward Sector 7, they can escape the encirclement. And they need to know that the drone ships are actually Centauri vessels." "Lisa, prepare a message to the U.S. Dauntless," Captain Thompson ordered. "Include everything we know about the Centauri plan." "Captain," Daniel said quietly, "are you sure about this?" Captain Thompson looked at the tactical display. The Terran ships were now taking more hits. Their formations were breaking apart as they tried to respond to the surprise attack. "I spent 20 years following orders," she said. "But some things are more important than orders. I won't watch hundreds of people die when we could save them." She turned to her communications officer. "Lisa, add to the message. Tell Commander Grant that the U.S. Watchman is breaking stealth protocols under my direct order. The responsibility is mine alone." "Message ready, Captain," Lisa said a moment later. Captain Thompson hesitated for just a second, then nodded. "Send it, and deactivate our cloaking system." Alan Parker typed quickly at his station. "Deactivating stealth systems now, Captain." Across the bridge, everyone held their breath. For years, the U.S. Watchmen had operated in shadows, unseen and unknown. Now they were about to announce their presence to both friend and enemy. The ship's cloaking field faded away. For the first time, the U.S. Watchman became visible to all sensors in the battle zone. "Message sent," Lisa confirmed. "The Dauntless is responding." Commander Grant acknowledges receipt. Frank watched the tactical display anxiously. Would the Terran fleet react in time, or had the warning come too late? "Centauri vessels are changing course," he reported suddenly. "They've detected us. 2 destroyers are breaking off to intercept the Watchman." Captain Thompson sat straight in her command chair. "Samantha, evasive maneuvers. Daniel, activate all defensive systems." She looked at Frank. "Mr. Miller, you're no longer just an observer. I need your tactical expertise now. Help Commander Grant fight her way out of this trap." Frank nodded, his training kicking in. "Yes, Captain." The U.S. Watchman, a ship built for stealth and observation, now found itself in the middle of the battle it was only meant to watch. The U.S. Watchman shook violently as the first Centauri shots hit their defensive shields. The ship was not built for combat. Its shields were designed to hide it, not protect it from direct attacks. Shields at 60%, Daniel Woods reported from the security station. They won't hold for long against dedicated warships. Samantha Hill's hands moved quickly over the helm controls. The watchman responded smoothly, diving and turning to avoid the worst of the incoming fire. Commander Grant is requesting tactical guidance, Lisa Rodriguez said from communications. The Dauntless is trying to rally the Terran fleet. Frank Miller stood by the main tactical display. He was no longer just watching. Now he was part of the battle. Send these coordinates to the Dauntless, Frank said, marking points on the display. If they concentrate fire here and here, they can create an escape route through the weakest part of the Centauri formation. Lisa sent the information immediately. On the large screen, they watched as the U.S. Dauntless began to follow Frank's advice. The massive ship turned its main weapons toward the points Frank had identified. The Terran ships are regrouping, Frank noted with approval. They're forming a wedge formation to punch through the Centauri line. Captain Thompson nodded. Good. Now we need to keep ourselves alive. She turned to her engineer. Alan, can we get more power to the engines? Alan Parker wiped sweat from his forehead. I'm rerouting power from non-essential systems now. We'll gain 10% more speed, but our shields will be weaker. Do it, the captain ordered. Samantha, use that extra speed to keep us moving. Don't let them lock weapons on us. The watchman darted between larger vessels, using its smaller size as an advantage. The two Centauri destroyers followed, firing constantly. We're drawing fire away from the Terran fleet, Frank observed. That's buying them time. Elizabeth Park looked up from her science station. I've analyzed the Centauri attack pattern. This was definitely planned well in advance. I'm detecting special modifications to their weapons systems that aren't standard Centauri military issue. Meaning what? Captain Thompson asked. Meaning this might not be an official Centauri military operation, Elizabeth explained. These could be rogue elements acting on their own. A massive explosion lit up the view screen. One of the Terran ships had scored a direct hit on a Centauri cruiser. The Dauntless is breaking through, Frank announced, unable to hide the excitement in his voice. They're following our tactical plan. Commander Grant's voice came through the communication system. U.S. Watchman, this is Commander Grant. We're implementing your suggested maneuvers. Request you continue to provide tactical guidance while we regroup. Acknowledged, Dauntless, Captain Thompson replied. We'll do what we can. Another violent shake rocked the bridge as a Centauri torpedo struck the watchman's port side. Damage report, Captain Thompson called out. Hull breach on Deck 3, Daniel reported grimly. Emergency containment fields are holding, but we've lost our port sensor array. Medical team reports injuries in the science lab, Lisa added. No casualties yet. Frank studied the tactical display, which now showed damage to their own ship in alarming red. The Watchman wasn't built for this kind of punishment. Captain, the Centauri flagship is moving, Frank said suddenly. They're realizing their trap has failed. They're changing strategy. On the display, a large Centauri command ship was turning to face the escaping Terran vessels directly. They're charging their main cannon, Elizabeth reported. Energy readings are off the scale. They're going to try to hit the Dauntless with everything they have. Captain Thompson looked at Frank. Options. Frank thought quickly. The Dauntless can't take a hit from that cannon. Not with their shields already damaged. They need to know the firing sequence so they can evade at the right moment. Can we get that information? Captain Thompson asked. Elizabeth nodded. Maybe. If we can get closer to the Centauri flagship, I might be able to analyze their weapons' energy pattern. That would put us directly in their line of fire, Samantha pointed out from the helm. Captain Thompson didn't hesitate. Set course for the Centauri flagship. Get us close enough for Elizabeth to get those readings. As the watchman turned toward the heart of the enemy fleet, everyone on the bridge knew they were moving from observation to direct intervention. Their mission had completely transformed. The Watchers had become warriors. The U.S. Watchman moved quickly toward the massive Centauri flagship. It was like a small fish swimming toward a shark. The flagship was 5 times larger than the Watchman, with weapons that could destroy the smaller ship with a single well-placed shot. "Distance to Centauri flagship?" Captain Thompson asked. 20,000 kilometers in closing," Samantha reported from the helm. "We'll be in optimal scanning range in 45 seconds. Lisa's voice was tense as she reported, "Captain, we're being hailed by the Centauri flagship. Admiral Lawson is demanding that we stand down immediately." "Ignore it," Captain Thompson ordered. "Elizabeth, are your scanners ready?" Elizabeth nodded, her fingers flying over her science station controls. "Ready, Captain. I'll need 30 seconds of uninterrupted scanning to analyze their weapon systems." Frank watched the tactical display with growing concern. "The Centauri have noticed our approach. They're redirecting 3 destroyers to intercept us." The bridge crew could feel the tension mounting. They were committed now. There was no turning back. "Samantha, prepare for evasive pattern Delta," Captain Thompson ordered. "But hold steady until Elizabeth completes her scan." "Aye, Captain," Samantha acknowledged, her hands poised over the controls. The Watchman continued its approach. On the view screen, the Centauri flagship grew larger. Its curved hull was covered with weapon ports. At its center, the main cannon was visibly charging, gathering energy for a devastating attack against the Terran fleet. Centauri destroyers approaching from port side, Frank warned. "They'll be in firing range in 20 seconds. Elizabeth focused intensely on her readouts, beginning deep scan of their weapon systems now. "Please hold course steady." The ship shook as long-range fire from the destroyers began to hit their shields. "Shields at 40%, Daniel reported. "We can't take much more of this." 15 more seconds, Elizabeth urged, her eyes never leaving her screen. Ellen's voice came over the comm from engineering. "Captain, we've got power fluctuations in the main drive. The shields are drawing too much energy." "Reroute emergency power," Captain Thompson ordered. "We need to hold position just a little longer." Frank studied the battle unfolding around them. The Terran fleet had used his tactical advice to break through the initial trap, but they were still in danger from the Centauri flagship's main cannon. 10 more seconds, Elizabeth called out. The ship rocked violently as a direct hit struck their starboard side. "Hull breach on deck 2, Daniel shouted. "Emergency teams responding." 5 seconds, Elizabeth continued, somehow staying focused despite the chaos. Another hit rocked the ship, throwing crew members against their stations. Sparks flew from an overloaded panel. "Scan complete," Elizabeth announced triumphantly. "I have the firing sequence data and their shield frequency information." Captain Thompson didn't waste a second. "Lisa, transmit that data to the Dauntless immediately. Samantha, get us out of here. Maximum speed." The Watchman turned sharply, its engines straining as Samantha pushed them to full power. The ship shot away from the Centauri flagship just as its main cannon reached full charge. "Data transmitted," Lisa confirmed. "The Dauntless acknowledges receipt." On the tactical display, they watched as the U.S. Dauntless suddenly changed course, executing a sharp evasive maneuver just as the Centauri flagship fired its main cannon. The massive energy beam missed the Terran ship by mere kilometers. "They did it," Frank exclaimed. "They used our data to anticipate the firing sequence." A moment of hope was quickly shattered as another hit struck the Watchman. The lights flickered, and several systems went offline. "Major damage to our port engine," Alan reported from engineering, his voice barely audible through the static. "We're losing power fast." "Reroute all available power to the starboard engine," Captain Thompson ordered. "Samantha, can you still keep us moving?" Samantha's face was lit by the red emergency lights as she fought with the controls. "I'll do my best, Captain, but we're losing maneuverability." Frank looked at the tactical display, which was now flickering. The 3 Centauri destroyers were still in pursuit, and the Watchman was wounded, struggling to escape. "Captain," he said quietly, "at our current speed and with our damage, we can't outrun them." Captain Thompson's face was calm despite the dire situation. Then we make sure the information we sent saves the Terran fleet. That's our mission now." As if to punctuate her words, another violent explosion rocked the ship, plunging the bridge into darkness for several seconds before emergency power restored minimal lighting. The battle was far from over, and the U.S. Watchman was in serious trouble. The bridge of the U.S. Watchman was now in emergency mode. Red lights cast harsh shadows across the faces of the crew. Smoke filled the air from burned-out systems. Through the view screen, they could see the Centauri destroyers closing in. "Shields down to 15%, Daniel reported. His face was streaked with dirt from a panel explosion. Alan's voice came over the comm from engineering. "Captain, the port engine is completely gone. Starboard engine is at 40% power. We're barely moving." Captain Thompson remained steady despite the dire situation. Status of the Terran fleet. Frank checked the tactical display, which flickered and occasionally went dark. "The Dauntless is leading them away from the Centauri trap. They're using the information we sent to target weak points in the enemy shields." "At least we accomplished that much," Captain Thompson said quietly. Lisa worked frantically at her communication station. "Captain, I'm getting a message from Commander Grant. The Dauntless is turning around. They want to come back for us." Frank shook his head immediately. "They can't do that. They'll be putting themselves right back in danger." Captain Thompson agreed. "Lisa, send a message to the Dauntless. Tell them to continue their retreat." "That's an order." "But Captain," Lisa began. "Do it," Captain Thompson said firmly. "We knew the risks when we revealed ourselves. The Terran fleet must survive." As Lisa sent the message, Elizabeth spoke up from her science station. "Captain, I've been analyzing the data we collected from the Centauri flagship. I found something unusual." "What is it?" Captain Thompson asked. "Their shield technology has a specific frequency modulation that I've never seen in standard Centauri vessels," Elizabeth explained. "If we could transmit this information to the Dauntless, they might be able to adjust their weapons to penetrate the flagship's shields directly." Frank's eyes lit up. That could turn the tide of the battle. The Terran fleet might not just escape, they could actually win. The ship shook again as another hit landed. More systems went dark across the bridge. "Shields at 8%, Daniel reported grimly. "Next direct hit will probably break through." Captain Thompson looked at her crew. "Can we send that shield frequency data to the Dauntless?" Lisa shook her head. "Our main communications array was damaged in the last hit. We can send basic messages through the backup system, but not complex data files." "What about a direct transmission?" Frank suggested. "If we get close enough to the Dauntless, we could use a focused, short-range transmission." "That would mean going straight through the Centauri forces," Samantha pointed out from the helm. Alan's voice came through again. "Captain, I might be able to give you one last burst of speed. I can redirect power from life support for a short time. Maybe 2 minutes of full engine power." "That's not much time," Frank said. "It will have to be enough," Captain Thompson decided. "Elizabeth, prepare that shield frequency data for transmission. Lisa, set up the short-range communication system. Samantha, plot a course directly to the Dauntless." "And the Centauri destroyers?" Daniel asked. Frank studied the tactical display. "They're still closing in. We'll have to go right past them." Captain Thompson stood up. Despite the chaos around her, she remained calm. "This ship was built to observe. Today, we chose to do more. We chose to act. Now we'll finish what we started." She turned to Alan on the comm. "Engineering, give us everything you've got." "Aye, Captain," Alan replied. "Redirecting all power to engines. Life support will be minimal. We'll have air for about 10 minutes after that." Captain Thompson addressed her crew. "Everyone, this is our final mission. Get that data to the Dauntless. Give the Terran fleet a fighting chance." Samantha's hands tightened on the helm controls. "Course laid in, Captain. On your order." The bridge crew looked at each other. They all understood what this meant. The Watchmen would not likely survive this final run. "Execute," Captain Thompson ordered. The damaged U.S. Watchmen surged forward with sudden speed, heading straight toward the Centauri line. Behind them, 3 Centauri destroyers gave chase. Ahead of them was the Terran fleet, with the U.S. Dauntless at its center. Frank watched the distance counter on his display. "Transmission range in 60 seconds, he announced. "If we can hold together that long." The final race had begun. A race the Watchmen might not survive, but one that could change the outcome of the battle, and perhaps the future of human-Centauri relations forever. The U.S. Watchmen raced through space, engines straining beyond their limits. Every metal joint in the ship creaked and groaned. The lights flickered continuously as power was diverted from all systems to maintain their desperate speed. "Centauri destroyers still in pursuit," Frank reported. "They're gaining on us." Samantha's hands moved expertly over the helm controls, making tiny adjustments to their course. "The starboard engine is overheating. I don't know how much longer it will hold." Captain Thompson watched the main view screen. The U.S. Dauntless was visible now, growing larger as they approached. Around it, the remaining Terran fleet was regrouping, preparing to continue their retreat from Centauri space. "Distance to transmission range?" the captain asked. 40 seconds, Elizabeth replied, her finger hovering over the data transmission button. "Shield frequency data package is ready." Lisa spoke up from communications. "Captain, we're being hailed again. It's Commander Grant from the Dauntless." "Put her through," Captain Thompson ordered. Commander Grant's voice came through, broken with static. "Captain Thompson, what are you doing?" "Turn back. We can't risk." "Susan," Captain Thompson interrupted, using the commander's first name. "Listen carefully. We have the shield frequencies of the Centauri flagship. With this data, you can penetrate their defenses and end this battle." "Olivia, we can send a rescue ship," Commander Grant insisted. "No time," Captain Thompson said firmly. "Just be ready to receive our transmission." The ship rocked violently as a Centauri torpedo exploded nearby. The near miss was still powerful enough to damage their already failing shields. "Shields failed completely," Daniel announced. "We're completely vulnerable now." Frank checked his tactical display. "Centauri destroyers are closing fast. They're targeting our engine." 30 seconds to transmission range, Elizabeth said, her voice tight. Ellen's voice came through from engineering, barely audible through the static. "Captain, the engine is going critical. We can't maintain this speed for more than another minute." "We only need 30 seconds, Captain Thompson replied calmly. Another hit struck the ship, this time hitting the hull directly. The explosion tore through the lower decks. "Major damage to decks 4 and 5, Daniel reported. "Hull breaches in multiple sections." 20 seconds to transmission range, Elizabeth counted down. Frank looked up from his tactical display, his face grim. "Captain, the Centauri flagship is moving. They've realized what we're trying to do. They're targeting us with their main cannon." On the view screen, they could see the massive weapon on the Centauri flagship beginning to glow as it charged. "How long until they can fire?" Captain Thompson asked. 15 seconds, Frank estimated. "Same time we'll be in transmission range." Captain Thompson nodded. "It's going to be close." The bridge crew worked frantically at their stations. None of them spoke of the obvious, that even if they succeeded in transmitting the data, the Watchmen would not survive the flagship's attack. 10 seconds, Elizabeth announced. The ship shuddered as systems failed throughout its structure. Emergency bulkheads sealed automatically as more sections lost air to space. 5 seconds, Elizabeth continued. The Centauri flagship's main cannon was now fully charged, pointed directly at the small reconnaissance vessel racing toward the Terran fleet. "Transmission range achieved," Elizabeth shouted. Her finger pressed the button, sending the precious shield frequency data to the Dauntless. At the same moment, the Centauri flagship fired its main cannon. The massive energy beam cut through space toward the Watchmen. "Data transmission complete," Elizabeth confirmed. Captain Thompson looked at her crew one last time. "It's been an honor serving with all of you." The energy beam struck the U.S. watchman directly. For a brief moment, the small ship was engulfed in blinding light. Then it was gone, destroyed completely by the overwhelming power of the Centauri weapon. But the transmission had gone through. On the bridge of the U.S. Dauntless, Commander Susan Grant received the shield frequency data from the watchman's final transmission. "They gave their lives for this," she said quietly. Then her voice hardened with determination. "Weapons officer, recalibrate all weapons to these exact frequencies. Target the Centauri flagship." The Terran fleet turned as one, no longer retreating. With the shield data provided by the watchman's sacrifice, they now had the means to fight back effectively. 6 hours later, the battle was over. The Centauri flagship was disabled, its rogue admiral captured. The plot to restart the war had failed, exposed by the actions of a small observation vessel that chose to do more than just watch.